If the government isn't using Bitcoin to buy military jets, like if it's not being used as a medium of exchange and they can continue to print fiat to do that, well, then the forever wars continue. I think we need Bitcoin to operate as money, as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and ultimately someday as a unit of account in order for the bright orange future that we all envision to actually come to fruition.
Yeah.
I'm not a fix the money, fix the world guy. I'm a human action fixes the world guy. And I think Bitcoin is just an incredibly powerful tool and driver of better incentives that we need to leverage as much as we possibly can.
In your words, you said, the yield on Bitcoin is freedom. I love that line. That was totally awesome. All right, guys, welcome back to another Byte Federal podcast. I have an awesome guest today, Michael Jordan, the Chief Growth Officer at the Bitcoin Way, where he focuses on helping individuals and businesses learn how to self-custody Bitcoin and secure their digital wealth. He's also the host of the Bitcoin Way podcast and a writer at Black Hat Bitcoin, where he explores the deeper philosophy of Bitcoin, self-sovereignty, and what it means to separate money from state. Michael, you said at one time that Bitcoin is more about price or speculation, and in your words, you said the yield on Bitcoin is freedom. I love that line. That was totally awesome, and we're going to hopefully talk about that more. And along with that, I want to talk about peer-to-peer money, the importance of self-custody, especially in this era of institutional adoption, and how Bitcoiners can maintain their sovereignty in this rapidly changing world. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Awesome. We're glad to have you. One of the first things in your X profile, it says you're a believer, a husband, a father, and a Bitcoiner. So I'm wondering how your faith has impacted you as an individual and your relationship with Bitcoin.
It's a good question. I don't know if I wasn't ready for this one. I mean, my faith is everything to me, and that's the beginning. I listed those things in order intentionally, and I'll say that Bitcoin has actually influenced my faith a bit. I've been a Christ follower for 25 years now, and when I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I started getting skeptical of everything, right? Like we tend to, and start asking a lot of questions about my worldview. And I would say that the only thing that survived the being put under the microscope was my faith. And but Bitcoin, I think, was an important role in making me go back and ask the adult questions that when I was 12 years old and made my faith my own, I didn't have the intellectual capacity to ask. And I think it withstood scrutiny. And but I'm grateful that I went back down that path and I asked those questions. I still think there are a lot of people who are sort of blindly believing much of what they were raised to believe, or some sort of political tribe that they've just tended to align with, which I know was the case for me for the early years of my Bitcoin journey. And but yeah, I mean, that's I wake up first thing a believer, second a member of my family that I'm so fortunate to have, and then third a Bitcoiner. I get to hang out with all the guys of the Bitcoin Way, and we have an awesome team. So I would say at this point it's all sort of intermingled in some capacity, the way that I operate in the world.
That's really interesting that Bitcoin triggered you to sort of relook at your faith. I think even for people who aren't religious, Bitcoin has this tendency to open them up to philosophy and to try and think deeper about the world at large. So do you think it's that Bitcoin is just completely reinforced your vision of your faith, or is it through the questioning of what's real and what's true that Bitcoin is triggered? Like I'm always fascinated by this topic because when I talk to people that have been in Bitcoin for some time, that have gotten past the number go up kind of ideology,
Yeah.
they often look at the rest of their life and start to question all sorts of things about what is real, what is true, and it oftentimes unlocks lies in other parts of their life. So I'm just wondering, what would that process look like for you?
Yeah, that's what it was for me, was the latter. I had sort of begun diving down different rabbit holes related to my health, fitness, educating my kids, right? Like a lot of things that are probably kind of obvious to many Bitcoiners who have done that work and that research and digging. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but the reason I came into Bitcoin was I decided 4 years ago to study crypto. Like I said, an annual learning goal at the start of each year. This is a topic I'm going to deep dive on. And I was fortunate to find Bitcoin, not crypto, very quickly. Within a year and a half, maybe two, I was all on board the self custody, self sovereignty mission, and that's what led me to the Bitcoin way. But one of my goals, I guess it was 2024. I've only been in Bitcoin for 4 years. One of my goals in 2024 was to read 2 books a month because with little kids, I don't have quite the time I used to. And one of those books needed to be faith based, and in particular, I was going to go evaluate the evidence back, supporting my faith. Was it valid, and like I said, did it stand up to scrutiny? And so I knocked out, I think read 25 or 26 books that year, and
Wow.
half of them were faith-based. And so it was just really a reexamination. I I felt I felt an obligation to, if I'm going to put everything else under the microscope and reevaluate how I eat and view the world and imagine politics and raising my kids and what I'm funding and what I'm not, shouldn't the core of what I believe withstand that same level of scrutiny? And shouldn't I have that same level of skepticism toward what I've just tended to believe, that I've had with everything else? And so it's been, it was a good sort of 1 year journey, and then it continues now. Now I'm diving into, sort of within my faith, there are, differing opinions about the nature of many things,
Mhm.
salvation, the end times, those sorts of things. And so part of my morning reading routine is digging into that. And one of the things that I really try to do very diligently is to assess both sides, right? So I knew, without getting like deep into the weeds, I'll give you just an example. There's sort of the Calvinism Arminianism debate within Christianity. Is salvation 100% grace? Is it through the acceptance of faith? And so there is, I guess you could say, some amount of work that the person needs to do. And so I picked up a book called Why I'm Not a Calvinist, and I picked up another book called Why I'm Not an Arminian, and they were designed, published by the same company, designed to give people multiple perspectives. And that's what I'm trying to do with every area of my life, right? Like I read a book just in January called The Problem with Lincoln, and it's why Lincoln was not a good president. And my whole life I've been taught Lincoln was the best president. He freed the
Mhm.
slaves. He did this and that. And so I just look at these different perspectives and try to come to terms with what I think is the most likely answer. And I'm comfortable where there's gray area and where I can't
Mhm.
be certain. But I'm hopeful. Like I think a lot less about myself these days and a lot more about my kids. What do I want them to know? And we're homeschooling, and so how do I, in light of what I've learned, how do I teach them to not necessarily just accept dad's opinion? Certainly, there are going to be things that I sort of uh, just baseline principles that I want to instill in them, but make them ask the questions early and to look at both sides of any story and understand that it's probably more complex than what the public schools are teaching you, or even than what a bunch of people in your echo chamber are saying.
Yeah. That's well said, and I guess you've really, proving the point of the Bitcoin meme, "Don't trust, verify," and, you've put that into practice, so good for
Try
you.
to, yeah.
Uh, you said you started, in Bitcoin just a few years back, so what was that journey like? When did you said you started looking at crypto at large and led you to Bitcoin, but was there what was the thing that allowed you to discern between crypto and Bitcoin and really focus on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I got really lucky because I had already, so my it was my 2022 resolution to study crypto. And at the end of 2021, as I was gathering audiobooks and, planning what I was going to listen to, podcasts, books I was going to read, all that stuff, I sort of stumbled into a friend of a friend who was the only person I had any connection to that was into Bitcoin or crypto. And he recommended, we went out, had beers together, and he recommended that I go listen to Preston Pish's podcast from episode number 1 to whatever he was at. I think he was like 50 in. Now he's a couple hundred in, I think. And I did that. while I was listening to a book called The Blockchain Revolution, which is one of the worst books I've ever had to try enduring. And I was very happy when I began to realize Bitcoin, not crypto, not NFTs, not DeFi. And I could go listen to like these very interesting people talking about things that I didn't really know a whole lot about, but were interesting, from politics to geopolitics to finance to macroeconomics, Austrian economics. And it was just much more engaging. And so that was sort of step one, was building that foundation, listening to just very smart people talk about Bitcoin specifically. And then the second thing that happened in 2022, I think you were around and you know, everything started collapsing. And I noticed folks like Corey Clipston at Swan, who was talking about how, basically these are giant Ponzi schemes. Don't trust FTX, don't trust BlockFi, don't trust any of these brands that ended up ultimately failing. And then I realized, well, the Bitcoin maxis have been right about a lot of things. Why is that? And so I kept digging deeper. Then I started picking up more of the books and not just relying on podcasts. And then, 2 years into my journey, I heard our founder, Tony Yazbek, on a podcast, and he was talking about self-custody. And I'd sort of migrated away from buying on Coinbase, and I'd moved into collaborative custody. And when I heard him talk, I was like, man, this is what I need. I need to be my own bank. I'm doing all these things that I believe achieve self-sovereignty long term, but I'm still KYCing myself or trusting an exchange
Mhm.
or trusting my keys somewhere else. Like I have some combination of these things that I just don't think I'm comfortable with in light of where I've come philosophically. And that was where I sort of made my next leap into proper 100% self custody, running a node, doing all the things that we talk a lot about.
That's great. So you avoided, the shitcoin debacle completely and went straight to
S
the
s I
Bitcoin
th
Standard?
so I wish I had bought, I bought a handful of shit coins and didn't really trade them. I just thought I was kinda
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe if I buy them and kinda hold them for a little while. I just didn't get deep enough to make any good or bad decisions with them, except a bad decision to buy them, I suppose.
Mm.
And so within 6 months, I think I had sold all those and went into Bitcoin.
Oh, that's
And I mean,
fast.
since yeah, since the again, I was very fortunate. I don't think I was smart. I think I was just listening to really smart people.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, since I remember I was at a wedding in mid 2022, and I remember trying to orange pill someone at that wedding. So it was 6 months, and I haven't put a dollar into the stock market, into anything else since then. I've been, moving everything I possibly can into Bitcoin.
That's awesome. Good for you, man. Well, myself and I know many others, we made a lot of mistakes to get to where we are today. So that's pretty rapid. I mean, you're obviously very deliberate about your education and trying to make good decisions. So that's fantastic.
I tend to be pretty radicalized in the things that I do. If I go all in on something, it just tends to be my North Star for
Mhm.
for that particular aspect of my life, whether it's my faith or the way that I eat or the way that we raise our kids or any of those things.
Awesome. That's awesome. Good for you. Um, so I want to get into this topic, which I think is one of the best lines I've heard in so long, which is that yield on Bitcoin is freedom. And I wonder if you could just, I mean, that's such a powerful line, but can you explain to our audience in practice what that means?
Yes. So I think it means a lot of things. Where it originated was we have a show on our channel, the Bitcoin Way podcast, called Bitcoin Banter. And I think what it was, we just talk about the news, sort of topical stuff going on throughout the week. And people have always been looking for, well, the problem with the problem with Bitcoin is there's no yield, there's no dividend, there's no cash flow. And it's like this constant fiat minded commentary that we're always trying to fight. And it's sort of a challenging thing to fight because on one hand, you've got folks who are retired and living on they need to live on some sort of fiat cash flow, and they're probably not going to be around to see Bitcoin just go wild for them in terms of fiat denominated price action and set them up for the rest of their lives. They only have 10 years or 15 years, and um they're cautious, which I completely can sympathize with. For me, what it means though is, I think the yield on Bitcoin is freedom is is first and foremost for many people, I think, financial freedom. Obviously, as you save in Bitcoin. And by the way, I don't, at our price points today, I don't even know what my cost base is. I'm probably down, in terms of fiat denominated. But over the long haul, I have complete conviction because of the work that I've done, the studying I've done, that I think it'll set me free financially in a way that I think many of us believe it will. But the second thing is, I think it opens our eyes. It reveals the nature of the fiat system. And I don't exclusively mean the fiat monetary system, but the other fiat systems that play in our lives. And as an example, homeschooling my kids. I grew up in public school most of the time, went to a private high school, which, by the way, was much more expensive and not a whole lot better in terms of the quality of what you're learning. It's basically the same sort of curriculum with maybe a little more attentiveness from the teachers. And so I realized, okay, this isn't what I want for my family. And so now my kids get to roam our property during the day while all of their friends are spending 7 hours a day in a blue lit room learning, most of the same garbage that the rest of the world has learned for the last 50 years in public indoctrination camps, as I would like to call them. And that's freedom, right? That, I mean, my kids getting to that is freedom that they have yielded because of my decisions that Bitcoin has led me to. It's, in my health, the way, I eat like 6 or 7 foods at this point, and I'm happy with, like, it's not like I feel deprived. I never eat dessert. I never cheat. The only cheating I ever do is, occasional alcohol if I'm hanging out with people, or, sitting by a pool during the summer or
Mhm.
something like that. And I feel better. I know that I get to grow old and to play with my kids into their, as I get older and they grow up and want to do things, I'm going to be able to keep up. I'm still able to do things at 36 that I probably couldn't hardly do. I'm so proud of myself. I should just say this publicly. I dunked a basketball. I'm 36 years old.
Wow,
I dunked a basketball the other day,
that's
and
awesome.
like
How
my
tall are
goal is
you?
6'2".
Okay, that's
And
good.
so my goal is just to continue to be able to do those things, and I
Yeah,
think if I was still living on the fiat trajectory that I've been on, I just don't see any way that that sort of thing would happen. And so it's freedom to be able to do things that in a fiat life you don't get to probably do because you just don't, you're not as healthy, you're achy, you're sore,
yeah,
you're overweight, you're whatever. And so I guess my point is I'm giving just a few examples, but I think Bitcoin yields freedom in other ways because of the path you tend toward when you start to really learn about Bitcoin and when you take that conviction and you put it into action.
yeah. Do you think it has I mean, it seems to reframe all of our perspectives of time and the value of scarce assets, right? So your time, your family, being the most scarce resources in your life, it does recenter you in a way. I noticed that, as I became more of a hardcore Bitcoiner, I became very much focused on the value of those scarce things that are the most important things in my life. And so it does recenter you in some way. And I've never been able to quite figure out why it does that, but it certainly does. And there's something really, really special about the protocol that seems to turn that on in people.
Yeah, I think relative to the average normie back when I was a normie, I probably had relatively low time preference. I think I've become hyper aware of the passing of time,
Mm.
especially since having kids and certainly since finding Bitcoin. My wife and I told you offline, we have 3 kids. We've got 1 on the way here this summer. And I think the reason for this 4th kid was probably a little bit of low time preference, Bitcoin-oriented behavior
Mm.
after because originally when we first got married, I was like, "I wanna have 10 kids, I'm ready." And then you start to have kids and you realize, "Wow, it's busy, it's a lot of work, sleeping is a lot." Sleeping is the most scarce
It's
thing in the world
optional.
when you have kids. Yeah, it's optional. But what the question I began asking myself was, when I'm 70 years old and we're gathered around, for dinner at Christmas, am I going to look back and wish, "You know what? We coulda had 1 more. We coulda had 2 more. Like, maybe we shouldn't stop. Maybe this life would be better and more full if our table was more full."
Mhm.
And, I can't know the answer to that for sure, but I wasn't willing to take a chance and guess. And So we got another baby on the way, and who knows, maybe we'll have
Congratulations.
more, you know. Yeah, thank you. At some point, you know, we'll stop, if for no other reason than we're getting older and it'll get harder. But I think those are the sorts of things that you just might be nudged in that direction because of some of the habits, the behaviors, the mindsets that you've adopted when you go deep enough on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
My encouragement is always to people, if you think that you've reached the end of the rabbit hole with Bitcoin, you're like, "Oh, I've listened to all the podcasts." You probably need to start digging deeper. And part of that for me has been, I mean, no offense. I have a Bitcoin podcast too. I don't listen to a lot of Bitcoin podcasts anymore. I've started digging deeper into, like, lately my sort of interest has been around from the 10th Amendment Center. They've got a great podcast called Path to Liberty. And you really start to get a sense as to, what did the founding fathers really design? What is
Mm.
the Constitution all that we think it's cracked up to be? What was their intention? And then you begin to understand and recognize other messes in the system that started with people like Alexander Hamilton, you know, sort of the big government folks, and why that was not really the design. And when you look at the war in Iran and things like that, or even like Venezuela. I see a lot of people talking about, well, Venezuela isn't really a war. It wasn't really a war. So, and I'm like, if you would go read the founding fathers, this is why they didn't want a standing army. It's absolutely an act of war. The fact that it doesn't last particularly long, or there's not a ton of resistance, does not make it not a war. And it was completely unconstitutional. And so you start to piece those things together, and it just helps you reframe how things really are when you dig deep on other topics. So I don't know what my next topic will be, but I'm sure it'll evolve, and I'll probably study the Roman Empire at some point because I feel like that's like something we all have to do.
Right.
Uh, but it makes your life more interesting when you can gather these different perspectives, and you've got some opinions on something besides just whatever Fox News or CNN tells you to have an opinion on.
Yeah, for sure. I know when, Bitcoin for me has been one of these things that, like you said, I'm only investing in Bitcoin, right? You're not putting money in the stock market.
Mhm.
And I think it's because we're not just investing in Bitcoin for the number to go up. We're investing in it because of the values and characteristics that come along with it,
Yes.
which opens up these doors to, what did the founding fathers really intend?
Mhm.
Why was I taught what I was taught versus what I am now learning because Bitcoin's opened these doors, right? And so then when you start thinking about, I want to apply my time, my energy, my money in alignment with those values, and you look around the world, like, there's nothing better than Bitcoin
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
that's what your intention is, right? And so I think a lot of Bitcoiners, like you, um, have kind of come to those same conclusions that this is where I need to be, and so I'm going to apply all my energy, time, and value to where it's going to have the best impact for me and for humanity at large.
Yes. Yeah, it becomes a moral obligation.
Right.
What beast am I feeding? Am
Yeah,
I
100%.
like,
Yeah.
am I feeding the fiat beast, or am I feeding the war machine? Am I feeding the obesity epidemic? Am I feeding all of these things that the most of the world is feeding, and unknowingly? I'm not calling those people
Sure.
immoral. It's a
Yeah.
lack of awareness, I think. But I'm really trying to push, like, I've got a very small handful of friends in my life. I don't have like a lot of really close, deep personal relationships, but I'm trying to push those people in the right direction. Especially someone like my brother is like primed for this stuff. And I keep on telling him, I'm like, man, you have the right answer on a lot of things. You've gone and kind of done the research on. He's a little more like down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. I think he's right on a lot of them. You know, I don't think they're really conspiracy theories. I think they're just things that most of the world hasn't accepted or learned about. But I'm like, dude, like, you're still part of the problem, even if you don't understand it, because you're funding the funding mechanism that they need for all of these things to go wrong. That's what you're buying into. And I've gotten him to buy some Bitcoin, but I haven't gotten him to go down the rabbit hole yet. And I think when he does, you're just waiting for, like, that switch to be flipped.
Yeah.
And once that switch is flipped, it's not that your whole life changes, but it's that you're open for your whole life to change,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And once you're open to it, then you can start reevaluating your politics and the way you live and what you save and invest in and how you spend your time in a way that I just don't think you can do before that. I know that there are other ways to get there. I know that there are a lot of people who were gold bug libertarian types before Bitcoin existed. Bitcoin to me is just like the fast track to getting on
Mhm.
that path toward a better low time preference life, though.
Yeah, for sure. I I think, one of the things it's done too for me is when like, I guess this aligns with this idea of separating money from state, which I know I wanna talk to you about, so maybe we could just go there now, but when you think it in those terms, right, that's exactly what we're talking about is disconnecting or quit feeding this fiat beast that's creating all this, malincentives in the entire system, right? So it leads you to Bitcoin as the best investment, certain types of food for the best food, and how do you acquire that food, right? Do you are y-
Yeah.
we do our best to buy almost all of our meat exclusively from local farmers that are within, driving distance from my house. Um, and organic. And then you start to question, like we don't we no longer have a family doctor because we haven't found one that would really meet our needs or even so we're doing things like, well, let's just go get our blood work done ourselves and analyze the blood work and then do research on what we could do to change our diet to make things better for us so that we can stay out of the healthcare system as opposed to participating with it, right?
Yeah.
So you can't like we can continually try to step out of the system bit by bit by bit, Bitcoin by Bitcoin, sat by sat.
Exactly.
And, it really does or has improved our lives all the way around. Um, we were always health conscious. We were always trying these kind of things. But Bitcoin just kind of cleared or gave us a different mindset and a more motivation to really separate ourselves from the state as opposed to waiting for Bitcoin to separate money from the state.
Yeah, that I think you nailed it. You're right because it does go it goes deeper. When I first started down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I heard Saifedean, guys like Sean Baker talking about the carnivore diet. I was like, Okay, I'm gonna try this." Like, I'm a curious guy. I'll try just about anything once. And, so I started ordering ground beef from Costco. And now I get, shipments from locally raised, grass-fed, grass-finished,
Awesome.
from a farmer here, not far from, where we live, but they'll ship right to your door. So I'll order
Yeah,
100 pounds of ground beef. I eat a pound or 2 of ground beef every single day. Like, it's why how I'm animal based is just tons of ground beef. Cheapest way I think to get, really good nutrient dense food, and then everything else, yeah, it's organic fruit and, raw milk from a local farmer here,
that's great.
those kind of things. But yeah, it's like the thing for me has been when I talk to people, I think it feels overwhelming. Like, what can we really do about this? The federal government is so big. There's so much corruption. There's so much evil. People are looking at the Epstein files and they're looking at wars and I'm like, I don't know. I can't do a whole lot about that. What I can do though is I can opt out. I
Yeah,
can save money external to the system. I can buy local grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef. I can homeschool my kids. I can tell other people about this. I can go get my church to adopt a Bitcoin treasury. Like, I can do all I can yeah, I did the same thing as you. I use, Safedean's brother, Ahmad, Dr. Amus.
mhm.
He's my doctor. I go
Oh,
one time a
awesome.
year, starting last year, I started, meeting with him one time a year and get my blood work done, have him take a look, talk through what I'm doing in terms of diet and all of that stuff with him, cancel our health insurance, move to Crowd Health, like, just all these little things, and there's still a lot of ways I'm plugged into the fiat system. I'm sure that I'm not quite I haven't connected the dots on,
Sure.
or I just haven't gotten around to. We were talking about Michelle Weekly. I love Michelle. One of the things she's inspired me to do that I haven't pulled the trigger on, but I'm gonna get chickens and start raising, chickens and having our own fresh eggs and that sort of thing. So,
Just
uh
side note, I was the one who got Michelle into chickens.
okay, so by proxy, you are my, okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to talk offline. You're gonna need
Yeah,
to
we'll
fill
do
me in a
that. We'll
little bit
get
on
you
what I
set
need
up.
to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm currently expanding the flock, so we can talk offline.
How many do you have?
Oh, I've only got 5 right now, but, yeah, no, we're going up to 15.
Okay.
We have some property that, is bigger, so we're working on transitioning from buying our grass-fed, grass-finished beef from a local farmer to starting to try and produce it on our own over time. So,
For you.
we got the land, and we've been putting in some infrastructure and, yeah, so bit by bit.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
love it.
it's
Yeah,
good.
but all those things, those are the sorts of decisions you start to make when you
Mhm.
follow this Bitcoin path and take it to where just walk it to its logical conclusion,
Yeah.
I think in many ways.
And I think people like you are setting examples that over the arc of time, people are gonna go, "I mean, what is Michael doing differently?" Because they're so happy, they're so healthy, there's and people just are gonna look at for examples, right? And, the more I haven't had much success orange pilling people.
Yeah.
I've had a lot more success when people go like, "What do you like, this is like, how did you do this? Or how did you do that? Or how you look great, you look healthy," or whatever, things like that. And, that's when people are asking you what you're doing, then, you've got something to share that's valuable. I spent so much time trying to stuff Bitcoin down people's throats and yell at them and be like, "What do you don't get? Why don't you see the light?" And, they just got pissed off at me, so
Yeah. Oh, no, same, man. That's it. I think it's lead by example. It's show
Yeah.
people that there's a better way and, sort of poke them and push them where appropriate, but I was always before Bitcoin, I was always sort of, I was, like, really interested in politics, and I would just debate anyone who wanted to debate, and looking back, it's kinda funny because I probably sounded like an idiot. I didn't even know what I was talking about. When I first found Bitcoin, I wanted to tell everyone about it, and I'd talk about it, and I'd drop comments, and I just realized no one wants to hear that, unless it's someone who is looking for a lifeline and is just primed to hear about Bitcoin. It's just not worth it. It's not that it's not worth it, it's just that it's not gonna work. Uh, the best thing you can do is just show people that, "Hey, I'm 36 years old, and look at all these things I'm doing that most people," if like, when I tell people I canceled my health insurance, they're like,
Right.
what do you mean? So if you get in a car accident and you're just screwed?" It's like, "No, that's not what I said. I said I don't have health insurance because I don't wanna feed the insurance, complex, and I don't wanna, feed big food and big pharma and all of these other things." Most people aren't curious enough or bold enough, I think, to ask the questions, much less take the action that they need to take.
Right.
But I think, sufficient pain is a really good way of getting people there, and I think, unfortunately, that's probably coming, but I
Yeah.
hope that by the time it does, I can be, uh, hopefully a crutch for them
Mhm.
as as needed, and then, for them to start saying, "Okay, so what is it that you did? Why do you do this? How does it work?" And
Right.
I'll have some answers, and hopefully by the time that day comes, if it does, and hopefully it doesn't, I am much further along in my journey, and I can show them how to raise chickens, and I can show them to do things that, a year ago I wasn't doing, so
Right.
it'll,
Yeah, that's
it's
great.
a fun journey.
Well, I didn't realize you were that into politics, but that's great to hear because I'm wondering what your thoughts are in relationship to Bitcoin adoption and the war in Iran. If do you have any thoughts there? Do you think this is gonna
So I
move the
think
needle in any specific way?
I think as we let it play out, it will, because I think there are a whole lot of people in Iran who are, uh, going to be forced to find a solution. They're the ones feeling the pain right now. It tends to be, we in the West are often sort of insulated from the direct pain. We get higher prices at the grocery store, that sort of thing, because of the money printing that takes place when there's, conflict. But there's someone who's seen bombs dropped overhead and who can't access their bank account and, whose grid collapses. And those people, I think, you've got millions and millions of people who are primed to look for a solution. What I'm cautious about is, again, Tony, one of our founders, he was in Lebanon when the currency collapsed. So I hope you still get a chance to have him on because he'd be a fantastic conversation. But he's told me most of those people are still just sort of living in desperation. They're
Mhm.
not really they didn't find Bitcoin, and they still think he's kinda crazy for thinking
Wow.
Bitcoin's this thing that could solve problems. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think at some point there's enough pain in enough places that, uh, people either there's a revolution that and hopefully it's not bloody and violent, or people just seek, options, and I
Right.
think Bitcoin is the obvious option. Gold's getting stranded in Dubai right now because of what's going on. It's a really good, it's a compelling reason why you shouldn't own big, heavy rocks as your store of value and your form of savings. Your Bitcoin, if the handful of people in Iran who have that are probably much better positioned to escape and continue their lives, in a relatively normal way somewhere else. But if you got gold, if your money's in an Iranian bank, I mean, I think it's on display for the world to see that that is just not a good place to be when things go sideways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really eye-opening when you start to see, and I don't know how true this is, but these are posts on X, but uh, that people were scrambling in Dubai to get out because there's been a few, bombs that have hit,
Mhm.
and apparently people that moved there fairly recently because they were trying to escape a wealth tax, or they're trying to escape um, a surveillance state, and they wanted to be someplace where they felt more free. They recently moved there, and now they're sort of like, I will sell my real estate at a deep discount if you pay me in Bitcoin. They're trying to convert these physical and less liquid assets into something like Bitcoin that they can take anywhere in the world, wherever they need to go. If things were to escalate in the Middle East and they wanted to leave, they need to have as much liquidity as possible in Bitcoin. And if that's the case, then then what Bitcoiners have been talking about for years is this kind of chaos and this kind of um, disruption around the globe should open up a lot of people's eyes, right?
Yeah. Do you have a thesis on this? Like, is this the fourth turning? Is this the catalyst for the big print? Is this a long-term war, or is this just some, skirmish that we're gonna see sort of fizzle out here soon?
Yeah,
Or
obviously I don't know. I have,
sure.
and every time I read a new update, right, I have another. I reassess and resculpt what I think is happening, but um, I I tend to wrap this up like, we have global mob bosses, and the
Mhm.
mob bosses are fighting for who gets to who's the godfather, right?
Yeah.
And the godfather until recently has been the London banks.
Mhm.
And now, there seems to be a lot of strategy. I think Simon Dixon does a great job of outlining this, but there's a lot of strategy around trying to take out the top boss and move the top somewhere else. And I think you have Trump and his administration and the technocracy within the United States trying to seize that moment. I think you have China and Russia playing the long game, thinking that, yeah, we being the West have to make this move to try and solidify our future. But if it fails, why should we get hurt in the meantime? Because we'll be the ones left standing with all the resources and financially stable. So I don't know that. I'm hopeful this isn't long. I think it's definitely a part of the fourth turning. Makes sense within the scheme of the fourth turning because it's breaking. I mean, Trump is just breaking every system that's been in place for any amount of time. It's done, right? So, as far as like accelerating in the fourth turning, he's got the pedal down to the floor. So it's going to break everything, but I'm also a believer that I guess I don't get too down about that or too upset about that because I've always been a believer that things don't get fixed until they break. And so, I think he's a useful tool in breaking the system so that we can rebuild something better. And I do think the fourth turning educates us in that regard, and I think just history in general shows you that a new system will be built, which will probably be a lot more fair, a lot more egalitarian for the whole planet, for every religion involved, for every culture involved. So Yeah, this has to happen, and I think I'm hopeful that with Bitcoin and sort of this new understanding of what is really true and how many lies we've been told, that we could build something better.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good thesis, and I've been, I don't follow Simon Dixon carefully. I'll see, like, clips from him and tweets from him, and I think I tend to what he tends to talk about, I tend to say, "Yep, that kinda makes sense."
Mhm,
But the other yield on Bitcoin, being freedom is I have the freedom to only care about this stuff and pay attention to the extent that it interests me.
mhm,
And so I'm not sitting there constantly looking for updates or commentary on what's going on in the world. Uh, I mean, my general assessment of Trump, and by the way, like my political background prior to Bitcoin
mhm,
was just very traditional conservative Republican sort of, patriot. I was a
mhm.
diehard patriot, and um, I've sort of grown out of thinking that there's a good team and a bad team. Haven't watched, cable news in forever. And I'm just sort of an anti-state libertarian type who thinks that we have natural rights ordained by God that I don't need someone to write down on a piece of paper for me, and I
Amen.
should be able to live.
For
I should
sure.
I should just be able to, live the way I see fit and leave everyone else alone, or
Yep.
invite them in to be a part of whatever it is that I'm working on and building. And I think that's a much better way. But I think that I did vote in the last election for Trump. It is the last time I'll ever vote because of what's happened with Trump. But unfortunately, I think the incentives are for what he is doing are horrible. I think it's power. I think it's ignorance. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. But I think you might be onto something that it's sort of the it's sort of the thing we need to play out and resolve itself in order to get on the other side of all of the chaos, and maybe to bring about enough, unfortunately, enough desperation for for a real solution, not a political savior, but a real solution like Bitcoin, like free market principles. Uh, that 5, 10 years from now, we look back on it and say, "Man, that was horrible, and all the lives lost were were it was tragic." However, it was sort of this reset that we needed to wake a lot of people up to, you know, Trump's not gonna save you, Kamala's not
Right.
gonna save you, Newsom's not gonna save you. Like, it's if you're looking for
Elon's not gonna save you either.
Elon's not gonna, yeah, Peter Thiel sure as hell isn't gonna save you. There are a lot of people that, and like, I'll be honest with you, I know this will rub a lot of people the wrong way, but I see so many people talking on X about Thomas Massey,
Mhm,
and to be fair, he says a lot of the right things, right?
mhm.
Like, there are a lot of things he says that I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be great." I don't think it's not very costly politically, to propose bills that are never gonna be passed, though.
Right, right.
And so my curiosity is, if you were really the president of the United States and you could sign executive orders, you could sort of unilaterally do a lot of things, which I don't think a president should be able to do anyway. But if you could, would he really go do the right things? Or would his life be under threat if he did the wrong thing? Or would he be bought and paid for to an extent that he isn't today? And so I get a little irritated seeing, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey fans who are like, if only my guy. And I'm like, guys, since George Washington, your guy has messed a lot of things up. Like the people who fought in a bloody revolution got into office, and then we have the Whiskey Rebellion. And then we have the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, which is unconstitutional. We have the Alien and Sedition Acts, completely unconstitutional. Like that was one, two, and three, right? Like those were our first three presidents. I just I no longer think that there are, you know, good men and bad men throughout history, or good people and bad people throughout history. I think they're just people, and I think they respond to the incentives that they have. And sometimes those incentives are good, and they're freedom fighters doing something that they believe is really important that I would tend to align with. And sometimes they are in the captain's seat doing things that I no longer support because they have power that their character can't handle. And I wouldn't trust myself in that position either.
Right.
So it's not like an indictment of specific people. It's just, I think, the nature of humanity.
Yeah, and I'll go just a little bit further in that I think that the red blue party separation is in itself a psyop
Yeah.
in order to divide and conquer. Because at
Working.
the end of the day, what's really happening behind the scenes are corporate interests and lobbyists getting getting what they want across the line for their own interest, and both parties end up being just the shill for whatever that agenda is, and it's unfortunate because uh, yeah, you just you as you, I'm a lot older than you are, and over the years of participating in the political system, you get to the point where it's just like,
What am I
Is
doing?
this is my vote even matter? Is it I
Yeah.
mean, because everything I've been told, every time I've been motivated to vote for somebody, nothing I voted for ever comes into existence. None of the
Yeah.
problems ever get fixed. So, I'm just this is why I'm sort of like, I'm fine if he breaks the system, because then we have a chance once all these big institutions are torn down and nobody's willing to listen to them, and everybody distrust now realizes the food pyramid was BS, and realizes the education system's BS and the fiat financial system's BS. Then they'll be like, what's real? And what do we really need as
Yep.
individuals to flourish? Because at the end of the day, when I meet somebody on the street, I don't care what their political party is. All I
Mhm.
care is, do I enjoy being with you? And
Yeah,
are you are you treating me like you're treating me nicely, and can we do we get along? Can we work together? That's all that matters at the end of the day, and everything else is just this psyop to sow division that is mostly meaningless when you
I
get down to
completely
it.
agree. And the two tools in their toolbox that I see are, one, voting to give you the illusion of some
Yeah.
say in what happens. They throw their voters enough bones to keep them distracted. So, for example, we got the Bitcoiners got free Ross, which is great. Like, I'm glad Ross is free. Um, the large swath of mega, diehard megas got an executive. I think it was an executive order. No men in women's sports, right? It's like, great. Like, I agree. Yeah, I don't want my daughter
Right.
competing against boys. Like, yeah, okay, no, no, no shit. um, but like, and so people get excited about that stuff long enough for their feelings of endorsement to be reinforced. Like, this is still my guy.
Right.
And then it makes it that much harder when the war in Iran starts to be like, that's not my guy anymore. It's like, no, he must have some good reason for this. It's like, I
Right.
don't know.
To
They're
cope.
human lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's exactly it. There are human lives being lost
Yeah.
for no reason. I mean, Iran's been weeks away from nuclear weapons for 35 years.
Right.
And why we saw the weapons of mass destruction, in the early 2000s, and didn't pan out. Like, you still buy that narrative. Does
Right.
that make any sense? Like,
Yeah, plus we already destroyed their nuclear arsenal. Remember?
yeah, yeah, and now we're doing it again. But that was last year, though. We need to go do it again this
We gotta
year.
do it again.
Yeah, it's completely true. But I think it's just enough to keep everyone distracted to believe that the other side is the enemy. And to be fair, there are very real divisions. Like, there are some people who think that men should be competing in women's sports, and it's hard to occupy a country together when you are that divided on something actually. Like,
Yeah.
it makes it, culturally, it's just a very challenging thing to navigate. I
They
think we'd
need
be
to just
better off.
create a third league and let the players go where they wanna go, and
There
we'll
you
see how successful their third league it really
Yeah,
is.
exactly. Who's watching that?
Yeah.
But that's just like, I mean, to me, I know some people listening might say, "No, no, men should be able to compete in women's sports, or they're not really men," or whatever. I think for most people, they would say, "Yeah, there's men and women, and they should probably compete separately on most things for obvious reasons." But that's it. The fact that it's obvious, like, that's why I'm really a secessionist. And that's why I do think Abraham Lincoln was a terrible president, is that I think that basically a bunch of sovereign states wanted to opt out, and it wasn't
Mm.
over slavery, I think, the way that many people
Yeah,
think it
right.
was. And he said, "No, I'm going to slaughter 800,000 of my former fellow countrymen and to keep this union intact, that people should be able to choose if they want to be a part of that." And they chose no. And I think we just see a lot of that sort of mindset today. I think it'd be awesome if
Do you
places
think
like
that's on the table after as we go through this 4th turning?
I think I think I am open-minded to anything happening. I think, I think we need a much bigger awakening of the American mind for that to happen, because I think even a lot of, like, Texas has been talking about seceding for forever. I think the average person, that's more of just like a rah-rah state pride. I love my,
Uh-huh.
my state, and I want it like, I think if it came to a vote, I think a lot of those people are just, uh, it's their bark's, worse than their bite. But I think we could get to a place, certainly, where people say, "This is the only option. The only option is Bitcoin for saving. The only option is seceding for, our own sovereignty to live the way that we wanna live." I think that'd be a beautiful thing, though. It'd be messy, but so is what we've been doing for the last since 1971 and, 1913, it's been kinda messy all around. So I'd rather get through that mess and then come out the other side with some level of influence over what my state does, because at the federal level, you just don't have any impact. I mean, to your point about, voting, at the state level, it's like, okay, you can have sort of a more culturally homogenous state, certainly full of diverse viewpoints and, ethnicities and, like, all the things that I think make for a great and vibrant culture. But here I live in Missouri. Here in Missouri, we think that men and women compete separately, right? And we think
Mhm.
that, you shouldn't be, forced to comply with vaccine mandates, and if you can get people to generally agree on some of these big issues, which I think at the state level is achievable, well, now you can have maybe a more productive free market economy and society, that when you've got California and, Mississippi trying to operate under the same national government
Mhm.
infrastructure, like, it just doesn't work. Those people
Doesn't
have
work,
nothing
yeah.
in common.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, since we've probably lost everybody who showed up for Bitcoin, let's get back to talking about Bitcoin. Yeah, exactly. Um, so I'm gonna jump right back to a question I have here about your talk in Prague in 2025. You said that victory depends, or Bitcoin's victory depends on it becoming a peer-to-peer electronic cash rather than just a store of value. So, I wonder if you could just kind of expand on that, and then we could talk a little bit about sort of the practical, process to get there.
Well, I think that, I'm not 100% sure if I believe that Bitcoin has to be used as money, like transactional, for transactional purposes, to continue storing value. And the reason I say that is because gold has continued, at least to this point, to
Mhm.
operate as something of a store of value, and no one is exchanging value in gold. That said, I had Parker Lewis on my podcast, and his response to that was, "Gold is dead. People just don't realize it yet. It's dying, and it's still retaining value to some degree because people just don't realize that it's not going to continue retaining value forever." I think what maybe my broader point is, and what I said in my speech in Prague was, if the government isn't using Bitcoin to buy military jets, like if it's not being used as a medium of exchange and they can continue to print fiat to do that, well, then the forever wars continue.
Mhm.
And if people still view fiat as a form of transferring real value to one another the way that they do today, then there are still going to be backdoor deals and crony capitalism in the, pharmaceutical and big food, the military industrial complex, all of these institutions that have basically been able to grow and cannibalize others in the industry by virtue of fiat. And so I guess maybe my broader point is just, I think we need Bitcoin to operate as money, as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and ultimately someday as a unit of account, in order for the bright orange future that we all envision to actually come to fruition.
Mhm.
Because if fiat can still operate as like a payment rails, well, they can still print more fiat, and maybe your Bitcoin goes up in value, and then what's the quote? It's like, then we're all rich and depressed or whatever, like
Yeah.
that could be the end game. So the more we can get people just spending Bitcoin, using it as often as they can, I think it's gonna fast track us to a better future. And by the way, I don't think Bitcoin fixes. I'm not a fix the money, fix the world guy. I'm a, human action fixes the world guy, and I think Bitcoin is just an incredibly powerful tool and driver of better incentives that we need to
Mm.
leverage, as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's well said. Um, yeah, it reminded me of some recent stuff that I've seen about, potentially countries selling oil for Bitcoin. as sort of that first step for sovereign entities to start making payments in Bitcoin so they can get final settlement. Because this, with what the BRICS is doing with gold, they are allowing if they're going to settle their trade in gold, then they are incentivized to try to manage their currency relative to gold.
Mhm.
So it is a somewhat of a constraint, right? Because if they decided to create an enormous amount of fiat, they devalue their currency relative to the price of gold, it's going to be harder for them to trade on the global stage with that fiat.
Mhm. Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense.
but it is totally doable if you don't care about your population, right? Like, if the government is completely disconnected from its population, it doesn't care what the outcomes are and has no risk of the population throwing them out, then they're gonna print. And, I mean, Venezuela is a classic example of that, right?
Yeah. I think that's why we need more of a bottoms up movement to
Yeah,
where the people who are providing real value in the world, the oil companies, I mean, plumbers, electricians, like people who we actually need at this stage
that's a good point, yeah.
to live our daily lives. When those people wake up to the reality that they are accepting a bunch of paper money that's devaluing, and then they got to go speculate in something else. And they say, you know what? I want the thing that's scarce that you can send me that settles right now. We don't need a bank involved. We don't have to deal with high fees, transaction costs, anything like that. I'm giving you real world value. You got to give me real world value, something backed by proof of work and not by proof of weapons, as Simon Dixon would say. And I think that's when a big shift starts to happen.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure. That's really
not everyone's gonna have that leverage because most people aren't. Most people are working in human resources, and it's like AI is probably gonna automate you away eventually. And I think plumbers and electricians and people, working on oil rigs, they've got a lot
Mhm.
more runway for providing real world value, to where they're gonna be, I think, a big catalyst.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. So do you think that stablecoins, hurt this effort?
I think that stable coins are, by and large, a very bad thing. I think that it could maybe I can understand why people in, impoverished nations, for example, use stable coins, right? Because they don't even have the money to save in Bitcoin. They need something that is relatively stable, which the dollar is compared to many, currencies of, third world nations, that kind of thing. And they don't care about the fact that it could be, turned against them and used for surveillance, and, it becomes a CBDC, which is my base case for what stable coins ultimately are. Um so I think some people need to use stable coins because it's just the best option that they have, and they can't afford a cold card, right? Like, they're not gonna take self-custody of Bitcoin. They don't have money to save, much less to purchase the tool that they need to be their own bank. Uh, but I think there are probably positive externalities of stable coins in the short term, and I think over the long haul, it's the CBDC.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. It's tricky, right? Because in one regard, maybe a stablecoin is an introduction to digital assets, and then from there, maybe you find Bitcoin. It also could be another pain point, like you said. Like if all of a sudden you realize this stablecoin you adopted is a CBDC and you're being surveilled and sanctioned and censored with what you can and cannot do because you have to do it over a stablecoin. Well, that could flip the light switch for a lot of people too, right?
Mhm.
Just like uh, what the Canadian trucker um, rally did, right? When a lot of people realized that their banks were being frozen, but Bitcoin couldn't be stopped. So this is it's a double edged sword, and I don't know how many people really realize that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think if you opt into the CBDC stablecoin prison, you better start very diligently begin working on what value you can provide to the world, because your off ramp's going to close eventually. And your only
right.
option is going to be to earn Bitcoin non KYC, because
So
you
is
you
that?
did something
Oh,
for
is that what
someone.
you think? I didn't realize you had that view. Is that? And maybe I misheard you, but do you think that someday that the U.S. or other Western nations will eventually make an off ramp or an on ramp to Bitcoin illegal?
I think I could certainly envision that future. I'm definitely not bullish on we've left the then they fight you stage. I think they
Right.
fight you different ways and with different tactics and with policies that look like they're helpful. I haven't studied the Clarity Act carefully, but my impression of it is it's probably not good. And by the way, I don't like the government, so I don't want them passing.
Sure.
Just leave me alone. Like, just let me do what I want with my Bitcoin, and let me have fun playing with my Bitcoin. That's
Mhm.
kind of how I feel. But yeah, I could see it getting to a point where the only way that they can retain control is if you can't buy groceries without their technology. Now that's the beauty of open source peer-to-peer software is that that option still exists, but it's only going to exist for the people who have it. Hopefully, it then sort of proliferates to the world. And, because, my local farmer maybe got trapped in the CBDC prison, maybe I can free him from it because I'm like, "Hey, man, like, they're not letting you they're only letting you buy 6 gallons of gas a week with that prison coin. How about I pay for my beef in Bitcoin, and now you've got some freedom money. Now you can go do
Yep.
what you want. They can't censor that."
Yeah,
And he
exactly.
said, "Awesome." And then he starts to build a stack, and then he has a supplier who's trapped, and he's like, "Hey, I'll pay you in Bitcoin." And, because I got a guy who's paying me in Bitcoin. So, uh, that's how I think the circular economy could potentially grow in a worst case scenario. And I would never trust that that isn't a length to which the state would go
Yeah.
to retain control
I
and to
totally agree with you. I
build
think I could totally see that happening, I mean, as much as, or at least to the extent that they try and trap Bitcoin as just an asset that you invest in and that you always have to exit out to the stablecoin to spend.
Yep. Yeah.
So maybe it's not illegal or, to hold or something like that, but, if I have a hard time thinking that they're gonna pass this de minimis tax exemption, that they're gonna promote Bitcoin as a payment protocol.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we see, Cash App and Square, rolling it out nationally. We see, Steak and Shake doing, good things and, uh, circular economies around the world, like Lugano and others, popping up. So, uh, so I guess at the end of the day, I come to the same conclusion you're at, which is that I wouldn't put it past the state yet, and I still think we are in they fight you phase.
Yeah. I definitely think that it's unfortunate. I think culture and narratives are very powerful. And I could envision a world where it's not illegal to transact in Bitcoin, but no one does it because it's just digital gold. It's just digital capital. It's just,
Mhm.
you don't spend your Bitcoin. And then we're stuck in this, some of us are exchanging value, living great lives. And some people are still trapped in the CBDC prison. Maybe they have a little bit of
Mm.
Bitcoin, but it would never it's in the ETFs, right? So, like,
Right.
BlackRock holds Bitcoin, like, they see their fiat wealth
Yeah.
going up because Bitcoin's going up, but they don't have access to any freedom because of that.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go next with this question because the logical follow-up here is what do you think about companies like Strategy and other treasury companies taking on so much Bitcoin onto the balance sheet as digital capital, right? Not to be spent, um, not driving a circular economy, providing a fiat yield, all these things that are Bitcoin neutered, Bitcoin, like, not what it was meant to be. Um, Now, I mean, of course, we have then 2 separate class of Bitcoiners. You have Bitcoiners that actually own Bitcoin, and you have people that have Bitcoin exposure, which are 2 totally different animals.
Mhm.
Like, do you think that the treasury companies are doing a disservice to Bitcoin? Do you think it's just leading to confusion and people will learn over time that custody their own Bitcoin is a way to do this? Or what are your
I
thoughts on
think
that?
I think that what they are doing isn't necessarily a disservice. I think that their marketing is a disservice. I think the fact that, Michael Saylor's going to conferences of retail folks and not just institutional and saying, "Hey, look at this, these products I've built." Don't get me wrong, I think you could get I mean, I look at Nakamoto and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'm glad we're warning people against the treasury company investments." But, could I see, like, strategy being turning out to be a great fiat ROI for some people? Yeah, they've got a ton of Bitcoin, and if Bitcoin rips, maybe they become some sort of a Bitcoin bank, and they've got the most, and so it turned out to be a good financial decision in fiat terms.
Mhm.
That's not how I think about my finances or my wealth, obviously, as I've sort of alluded to. I think that the fact that a lot of people view here's where I get concerned. So I went to the Bitcoin conference last year, and I knew it was going to be a lot of talk about stable coins and stake your Bitcoin and earn yield and crypto or whatever, like all that
Mhm.
stuff. Um, I'm so far past that it just doesn't phase me. But I put myself in the shoes of someone who's walking around there who just found Bitcoin 6 months ago and is super excited to go to their first Bitcoin conference. And they see Michael Saylor and they see politicians talking about it and they hear about stable coins and they see all these crappy products where you got to put your keys at risk, your coins at risk to do something that should magically make you more fiat or something. And I just think what a disservice. And I feel the same way with Bitcoin backed loans, candidly.
Mhm.
It's I think most people don't understand what digital scarcity is and what a revolutionary concept it is. And so they sort of flippantly put their stack at risk um, for high time preference behavior and desires of the flesh, so to speak.
Mhm.
And I just think it's a really bad idea. And so I don't. I think I will never criticize a company for buying Bitcoin. I think that's great. Like I think strategy should be buying Bitcoin. I think Steak and Shake should be buying Bitcoin, and
Mhm.
everyone should buy Bitcoin, right? My friends, my enemies, and everyone in between. And I also think that marketing fiat products because you have a bunch of Bitcoin still sort of feeds the system. I know
Right.
that they have products that I've heard people say, "Hey, I think," like people I trust who are like, "Hey, I think this could actually be sort of the Trojan horse." And I'm hopeful that's true. I'm not a finance guy, so I don't really have the chops to
Mm.
evaluate how much
Mhm.
I believe that. In the absence of knowing with certainty, I just shy away from it and say, I don't want to take a chance on feeding fiat. I want to increase my Bitcoin stack. I want a life of self sovereignty, and
Yeah.
I want to educate people on those things. Anything else is speculative in my mind, and I'm not a speculator. I'm not even an investor. I'm a saver, and I sleep well at night because of that mindset.
Right. I mean, well, a lot of people are talking about this idea that, like, strategy is going to probably hit the million Bitcoin mark that
Mhm.
supposedly the SBR also wants to target.
Yeah.
Do you
You
think
you you
there's
think do you think strategy becomes the SBR? This is an interesting
that's what I'm wondering, like, I've heard people talk about this. I'm wondering if you have any thought on this. Like, is there a point? I mean, you start to look at, like, we're investing in Intel, right? We're gonna invest in refineries, and we're nationalizing refineries in California. So if we move to less of a Western democracy and more of some sort of capitalist slash nationalist blend, could the U.S. government just invest in strategy and, like, say, own a large chunk of strategy and then say, hey, there's our million Bitcoin over there?
I'd take it one step further. I think they could just take over strategy and just it's not even like a sovereign wealth fund style play. It's just,
Mm.
hey, you're our Michael, you get to continue being our you can sort of operate the fund, so to speak. And that's our Bitcoin now. Uh, I could see them go, yeah, I could see them investing in strategy and sort of having access to
Mhm.
that capital in some way. Again, man, we've got world leaders, eating babies, right, in the Epstein files, like, uh, nothing's off the table, like,
Nothing's off the table.
no
Exactly.
power play is off the table, and so I think if they become desperate, yeah, I think strategy is a prime target. Uh, I think it would be really cool to see a privately held company, um, start stacking massive amounts of Bitcoin. Um, Not because I want the centralization of the supply of Bitcoin, but for them to say, I'm not keeping this on Coinbase Prime. Like we're going to put in the work to do an advanced multi-sig setup. And we know who the players are. If someone dies, if a plane goes down, whatever happens, like we know how to continue to operate with our Bitcoin and like try to be like the self-sovereign company. Like the
Yeah.
Bitcoin Way is doing that on a small scale.
Right. Yeah, I know of
But
a few good-sized companies here in Florida that are doing it, for themselves. Um, I don't know exactly how much Bitcoin they have, but they're
Mhm,
following that path, and it's pretty
that's awesome.
cool. They've been doing
Yeah.
it for a lot longer than people realize too.
Yeah, every once in a while, I'll see River will post they'll, like, post on X, and it's like, "Last week, we onboarded a barber shop," they'll
Oh,
go
that's
down a
cool.
list of just like yeah, like a general contracting company, like, all these just random businesses to help them buy and secure their Bitcoin.
Yeah,
And I'm
that's
like,
awesome.
"Man," like yeah, like, you never hear about this stuff, but whenever I see one of those, I always bring it up to talk on our show because like, that's the
Yeah,
signal.
you don't wanna dox your customers directly, but I mean, we've have, several hosts that host our Bitcoin ATMs that have taken their compensation in Bitcoin, and if you look at what we paid them, if they've held on to it, they've made millions,
That's awesome.
you know? So it's pretty cool. It's pretty
I love
cool to see how it
yeah.
just infiltrates the system and affects so many people.
Yeah, but I think those are the companies that are gonna survive, a fourth turning, and they're gonna come out ahead with Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and they're gonna be able to do things and expand things and invest in AI or whatever tools they need, and it's just because they have forward-thinking leadership who, aren't willing to take a chance on the fiat system, and, I don't know if you read Larry Lepard's book, The Big Print, but he details how he, his dad, his grandpa, they were all rug pulled by the fiat system in some form or fashion over the years. And I think there are a lot of people who experience that, who also own businesses,
Yeah,
are curious enough to find Bitcoin, and then they say, "Hey, this is my out. I don't have to experience that again. I don't have to worry about experiencing that for the first time. I can just buy Bitcoin, take self custody, and do whatever I want with it,
yeah.
and live a good life."
You talked about your your attending these Bitcoin conferences
Mhm.
and all the institutional messaging that's there, the ETFs, the ordinals, the stable coins, on and on and on. What what do you think how do you think people should go to those events, observe, but what can they do to stay focused on their self-sovereignty? Like other than just educating themselves, you know, and yelling at the conference.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess attending the smaller conferences would be an eye opener for some people. But, it's like if multi-sig's the answer, um, and, you're trying to really live a sovereign life, how do you not get impacted by everything you see at these big conferences?
I think it does start with, educating yourself, conviction. Like, I go to Vegas, for example, because we have clients there. I've got good Bitcoin friends who go to that, and it's a good place to network and catch up with people, find guests for the podcast, that kind of thing. But it's very easy for me to walk by a booth. I can do a quick once over of what they are. Never heard of them before, and I'm like, "Yep, shitcoiners, not doing that."
Mhm.
Um, I think there are high signal conferences, like I think BTC Prague, is a much higher signal conference, and, finding those sorts of opportunities, if you can make it work, I think is a good way to just ignore it. But I think you can almost I think if you just go talk to the people, like, if you stop by the Start 9 booth and you talk to Matt Hill, you can figure out pretty quickly, this is a guy who's about self-sovereignty, like, he's very principled. It's sort of, back to the basics of what are we trying to accomplish? We want people to, be able to compute sovereignly and store their files sovereignly, and we encourage people to run a node and to do just like the building blocks, right? It's the Bitcoin equivalent of eating grass-fed, grass-finished, local ground beef. Like, when you find those people who are talking about that stuff, that's when you know that you're on the right track. When you have someone who has a product that you're not wrapping your head around very well, that's maybe an indication that it's not for you because most of the stuff is pretty simple. I mean, you just air gap Bitcoin only, open source hardware wallets. And if it's doing all sorts of other fancy things and supporting all sorts of other products, that's, complexity, I think is the enemy. And and the same is true when you're walking around a Bitcoin conference. If it looks complicated, it's probably not a tool you really need.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I'm wondering, have you put any thought into AI and how this might impact Bitcoin sovereignty, positive or negative? Have you been doing any
Uh,
research, any reading on that?
I haven't done a lot of reading on it. Sort of, I've seen enough people talking about Bitcoin, AI utilizing Bitcoin. And it makes sense to me, right?
Mhm.
It's digitally native. It is the best form of money. It's something much easier for a bot to spin up a Bitcoin wallet than it is to try to KYC itself,
Mhm.
in the banking system. So it does make a lot of sense to me. I'm sort of tinkering now. Like I've spent 20 hours the last week, troubleshooting my own, bot and sub agents, just trying to not fall behind like I did with Bitcoin. I was way too late to Bitcoin. I don't want to be too late to leveraging some of these tools. And I can see I still have a long ways to go on the setup. It's not plug and play yet. I know someday it will be. But I can see where AI is going to utilize Bitcoin. um, I think where it gets messy and sort of complicated for me is it's like, okay, what are the role of humans in an economy that is largely driven by AI? And I don't know for sure, but I don't think I think that authentic artists, musicians, people like that are going to succeed. I don't think that 8 billion people can be artists and musicians and succeed. Um, so that kind of makes it's like, where's the demand for wh- if everyone's unemployed because of AI, who is incentivizing companies to invest in the energy production to generate electricity to fuel AI? Who is incentivizing data centers to to operate the models that we want to use? Um, I really don't know how it all plays out. I could see AI on one hand taking over the world the way that automobiles have taken over the world, but there are still a lot of jobs. And I could see a very dystopian future where I'm not really sure what people are doing.
Mhm.
Maybe this is the end. Maybe
Mhm.
this is maybe the second coming is our next step on this journey. I'm really not sure, but I think Bitcoin will be used by AI models because I think it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else has too many bottlenecks, too much demand for identification, and a bot can't identify itself as a natural person, obviously. So I don't know that I could really
Right.
share anything insightful on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I go down that AI rabbit hole of okay, nobody has a job.
Hmm.
Robots and AI are producing everything for humans. Then it leads to this idea that you have to have incredibly scarce money so that one Satoshi is
Hmm.
enough to have wealth to support yourself. I mean, granted, everything would be getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper,
Right.
but it's only getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper against a fixed currency or currency units.
Right.
If they keep expanding the currency units while production is getting then they're just going to destroy everybody,
Hmm.
right? But
What's
if you produced at scale into a unscalable currency, then every Satoshi buys you more and more and more and more.
mhm. What's your so AI aside, like what's your base case for Bitcoin? Are you like in the hyper Bitcoinization camp where in 20 or 30 years everything's measured in
Mhm.
Bitcoin? Or are you this is kind of a parallel economy? A lot of people are trapped in CBDCs.
Yeah, I am. I look at it in phases. So
Hmm.
I do think the next phase is a lot of people trapped in CBDCs and stablecoins and Bitcoin as a parallel economy with little circular economies emerging around the world that I then think people on the outside will look at and go like, why are they doing so much better in that city state in Texas where everybody's trading Bitcoin? Or, um, and it's going to be this realization of here's this group of people, somewhat sovereign, doing really well versus here's this other group of people living in a 15-minute city in a surveillance state where they're told they can't buy meat except 3 days a week or whatever, right? And I think that is the pain that's gonna wake a lot of people up. So I think that's the first phase, and then I think down the road, um, maybe when our kids are our age, we're gonna start to see nations adopt a Bitcoin standard, because the people are either going to adopt it ahead of time, and then therefore the obvious elected candidate will be one that supports what the people are already doing. And we're already seeing that in Africa, right? We're seeing most of the continent of Africa is moving rapidly to just using Bitcoin peer to peer. They're bypassing stable coins and the whole ball of wax. But they were very much primed for it in that they didn't have a functioning currency. They didn't have a functioning banking system. They were banking themselves with cash inside their communities and their villages. And so Bitcoin just became the ultimate tool to expand upon that. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
so I think it just goes in phases. I think we do get to hyper Bitcoinization over a much longer time period than even I anticipated early on, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I think being in this space since 2017, I just have seen that our vision of the future can move far faster than the actual population of the globe changing and going through the changes that we recognize, right?
Yeah.
So we're still super early,
Yeah,
super early.
we are. Do you get frustrated with, so here's the deal. I spend a lot of time kinda making fun of the number go up maxis. Like, I just think it's just high time preference, impatience, at play. At the same time, I would be content, but a bit disappointed if I got to the end of my life and I'm like, "We're on this right path. I didn't get to enjoy and appreciate the fullness of what I adopted." I'd be grateful that my kids get to inherit, the legacy of my proof of work
Mhm.
and, the studying and the stacking that I did. But, like, there's a part of me too that, I do want that for my kids, but, like, I'd love to, over the next 10 or 15 years to, uh, have some of the financial freedom, in terms of purchasing power as well. Do you feel like we're still gonna see a lot of that? Or do you think? Because here's the thing, I've only been in Bitcoin for 4 years, so I am not, like, a great, person to speak to this. It feels like we've been chopping around for a while. Even like the 70 or 60, $70,000 to $126,000 purchasing power range
Mhm.
is not a very big range. It's still sort of confined to whatever. Could you see us just hanging around 70, 150 down to 100, 160, where there's really not a lot of material progress for a long time? And then when you factor in inflation and the devaluation of the
Mhm.
dollar, you're not really gaining a lot of purchasing power. Um, but it just kind of happens very slowly. Or do you think we're still going to see, like, the volatility? We're going to go to a million and then we're going to, crash to 500 and then we're going to go to 5 million and then crash to a million.
Um, of course, I have no idea, but I do think that the power law is as good of a model as I've ever seen,
Mhm.
in this space, and that would lead us to believe that we're probably gonna be more on, like, a declining, CAGR. So, to say that Bitcoin's gonna have these 10x, 20x, 30x runs in the future um, might be exaggerating it. Do I think we get to $1,000,000 a coin? Absolutely. Do I think we go to 5, $10 million a coin? Absolutely. I just think it takes far longer as Bitcoin grows and can absorb more capital. The the amount of capital that it needs to absorb to move it to these higher stages, is really big.
Mhm.
So, it's going to take treasury companies. It's going to take, um,
SPRs, it's
yeah,
gonna take.
strategic
Yeah.
Bitcoin reserves, central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and so it's going to take that kind of capital to move it there.
Mhm.
But I think that's inevitable because they their entire fiat system is being disrupted
Yeah.
by itself. Regardless of whether Bitcoin is here or not, their system is falling apart.
Yeah. I
And
tend to agree with that. I guess my follow-up question would be, so, I haven't studied the power law
yeah.
closely, but there are enough people I know who reference it, who I trust and I think are
Mhm.
thoughtful in their analysis of these kinds of things, and they're not trying to play price prediction experts or anything like that, like, they're not throwing out specific numbers. Um, all else equal, I think I could probably get on board with that. If you're just looking for like, "Hey, generally, what might I expect?"
Mhm.
I think it's probably a good conservative way of level setting, you know?
Yeah.
However, I wonder if there are black swans, that will come about that completely disrupt, like, the "all your models will be broken"
Right.
meme, comes true because there just is no other option because
Sure.
of something that happens. I don't know what that black swan is. I could imagine it being any number of things, but, um, I tend to prepare myself mentally for what you've described as, kind of power law. I'd love to go to 1,000,000 tomorrow, although I wanna keep stacking sats, but it's probably gonna be 2030 or something like that.
Mhm.
But, a new world order is created and we go to 10,000,000 next year. Also, I wouldn't be shocked. And that's
Right.
honestly, that's my sense of urgency telling people, "Stack sats. I want my church to get Bitcoin. Take self-custody," because, yeah, maybe you've got some time, maybe you've got some runway, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a crystal ball.
No, absolutely. It's totally within, the power law for Bitcoin to hit 500,000, 700,000 in short order. That wouldn't, like, break the power law. It probably wouldn't want to be a top that you would want to buy, but, you know, I like to look at the power law from the perspective of, these are the bands I wanna stack in, right? These lower bands are where I wanna accumulate, so that I can, have more and more Bitcoin as time goes on, and that's the way I look at it. I look at it from how many Bitcoin can I acquire versus what the price of the Bitcoin is, 'cause like I think like you do, that eventually there will be a time where the fiat system is so broken that either we're going to have a huge print, in which case the price of Bitcoin will skyrocket, or let's just say we don't get the big print. Let's say the system just implodes. And you're saying, oh, well, God, well, then we're going to have a Great Depression, right? We're going to have a 1929 moment. Then you're going to have a 1929 moment with fiat, or you can have a 1929 moment with Bitcoin. And all the Bitcoin you purchased prior to that event is still going to maintain its spread. It's going to still maintain its purchasing power relative to the fiat.
Mhm.
That spread that you attained, right? So if you
Yeah.
put $100,000 in and it became $1,000,000 worth of Bitcoin, when the dollar goes to a penny, you may only have $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, but it's going to buy you $1,000,000 worth of goods. So
Yeah.
you'll maintain that spread in all these situations. So I'm not as concerned about whether, we get the big print or we have a complete deflationary collapse. I just know that I have one of the scarce money on the planet, and that's always going to preserve my purchasing power, regardless how things are trading.
Yeah, I think that's right. The beauty for me is that I don't really have to think too hard about it. I get paid in Bitcoin. Like, our company operates completely on
Cool.
a Bitcoin standard, and so I have to offload what I need to pay bills, but other than that, I stack at whatever price point Bitcoin is at
Yeah,
the
which
end of the
is great.
month.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, like, I thank God for the dips because,
Yeah.
I get a lot more sats at the end of the
Yeah.
month,
Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to be aligned with the protocol. So before we wrap up, I wanted to focus on some advice for new Bitcoiners. You being in the business you're in, when you're advising people, you hear probably a lot of the same things, a lot of the same questions.
Mhm.
So, if you had somebody sitting across from you that was just brand new, wanted to get some Bitcoin, what would your advice and your guidance be for them?
My first advice would be to study it, to learn, to grow in your conviction because I was fortunate. I told you I went deep quickly. It never crossed my mind to sell my Bitcoin. like it still hasn't. Like the bear markets don't shake me, but I think it's because I put in the time to really study it, understand what I hold, and to realize that there's going to be infighting in the space, and I don't think that's something you ignore, but I think it generally I think Bitcoin will come out on top. Um, and so first of all, just study it. Read all the best books, read the Bitcoin Standard, read the big print, read Gradually Then Suddenly, listen to high signal podcasts where they're talking if they're not talking about self-custody and they're only talking about ETFs or Michael Saylor or institutional adoption, find a different podcast. I think those are that's like the first step. And then as quickly as you can do that, you should be on the trajectory of buying Bitcoin in a better way. If you need to start, accumulating on KYC rails. I think that's where everyone starts, right? So get going, and even as you're learning, your conviction isn't real high. Start stacking a little bit that you're like, I'm comfortable losing this $10 a week, whatever it is. Just because I don't think you're going to end up feeling like this is something I'm going to lose. You're going to end up feeling like this is the most important thing that I own. And then start to don't stop learning, but not just about Bitcoin and why the big prints come in and why there's a great macroeconomic case for sound money, but start to learn about okay, what do I do with this thing? What does it really mean to be a Bitcoiner? Oh, I need to participate in the network. I need to run a node. I need to make an educated decision about what implementation of the software I run. I need to take self custody. I need to dig in to understand not all hardware wallets are created equal, and I want to get the best ones. And I need to be my own bank in a self sovereign way. Like the goal here is, like I said, the yield on Bitcoin is freedom, and it's not. You don't get that freedom just by buying a little bit of Bitcoin and keeping it on Coinbase. Like that freedom doesn't exist. It's completely permission there. And so I guess my encouragement, like maybe a broader way of saying that is you need to get to the point as quickly as possible as a sort of a new participant in Bitcoin where you feel compelled to live a more self-sovereign life. And if you're too distracted by what Michael Saylor's doing or what other institutions are doing or fiat products because there's some Bitcoin strategy on the back end, you've got more studying to do. You need to get to the point where self-sovereignty is your mission, and Bitcoin is one of the tools in your toolkit for getting there.
That's great advice. I love it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, your podcast, your writings, and the Bitcoin way?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. It's been a great conversation. I'm on X. It's probably the place you can find me at the other M Jordan. So I'm the other Michael Jordan. I'm reminded continually now I'm the other Michael Jordan because now we've got a famous actor because I'm also Michael B. Jordan,
No,
unfortunately. But go to thebitcoinway.com/podcast. You can schedule a time with our team to learn about how we help. We help you take self-custody. We've got a whole suite of self-sovereignty services, though. So we help you protect your information, set up privacy phones. We've got a Plan B residency option. So having a Plan B is not just for the elite and the wealthy. There are other options as well. You can follow us on X at the Bitcoin Way _ and then go check out our podcast. Where Rumble, YouTube, whatever. Just search the Bitcoin Way, you'll find us. And have very fortunate to have very interesting guests on the show every Friday. And then and Paul, I'd love to have you on there. By the way, we can talk
awesome.
offline. And then we've got other segments. Bitcoin Banter is a really fun one, bi-weekly. We talk about Bitcoin news and everything. So lots of fun stuff going on at the Bitcoin Way any time of day. It's a fantastic place to be. And again, Paul, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed getting to know you over the chat. So thank you
Yeah,
very much for being a part of it. Like
of
and
course.
subscribe, guys, and we'll bring you more guests like Michael here. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
So you've heard Bitcoin is the new gold rush by now. As world leaders on all sides have endorsed it as the future of money, and now you're looking to get started, we'll show you how. It's actually easier than you think. First, go to your nearest Byte Federal ATM and turn your cash to coin. Byte Federal has over 1,200 locations around the country with the highest daily limits. Go to our website, bytefederal.com, to find the nearest ATM to you. Log in to any wallet, then create an account, deposit your US cash, and instantly convert it to Bitcoin. That's it. We are the only U.S. manufacturer and operator in the Bitcoin ATM industry, and our U.S.-based live customer service is second to none. Go on, give it a whirl, and don't get left behind. Click the link below.